morning, good day, and good evening, everyone. Wherever you are in the world, I hope you're staying safe and healthy. And of course, thank you so much for joining this conversation on mitigating the impact of severe weather events through software. My name is Mina Mesfahi. I'm a research strategist at Solar Plaza. Just to give you a little bit of background on why we decided to do this conversation and how it's relevant for the US market right now. Well, the US has experienced some of the deadliest storms and extreme weather challenges in the last few years. These extreme weather-related circumstances pose a great threat to solar projects. In some cases, the projects need to cease operations, leading to financial losses for the asset owners. In 2019, the damage caused by a hailstorm at a 160 megawatt solar project in West Texas resulted in an estimated loss of $70 to $80 million. Overall, the risk management process in solar projects entails many layers, from design considerations, choice of technology, EPC or O&M experience, to site-specific elements. While windstorm-prone locations have always been important, lately additional factors such as wildfire exposure and hail resilience are guiding most conversations about reliability. Engineering considerations and technology choice will be important in helping projects withstand the natural disaster perils associated with these extreme weather circumstances. If you are curious about the topic, then you are in for a treat today, as I'm joined by two true industry experts. I will give you a brief introduction about our speaker guests and will let them tell you more about who they are and the work they do. All right, let's start with Marty Rogers. Marty is the Vice President of Global Asset Management and Support at NexTracker. He oversees the worldwide service and support for the rapidly growing NexTracker company, who we all know is at the forefront of innovation in tracker technology. We are also joined today by Cherif Kedir, President and CEO of RETC, who has an extensive engineering background and is really getting into the weeds of product engineering, failure analysis, yield enhancement, and all those good stuff. All right, Cherif, how about we just start with you, a brief introduction about who you are, and more about the work you do at RETC.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Good morning. So just a quick introduction on RETC. We've been around since 2010. We've been serving the industry, the renewable energy industry, focusing primarily on photovoltaics, but also all the infrastructure surrounding the photovoltaics, racks, trackers, inverters, and the rest of the balance of systems. We started the company in 2009 really in hopes of helping the industry and all the companies that were starting out back then. It was fairly early in the days of solar, trying to get into the market, trying to prove out products, navigating the certification arena and the mazes that they had to go through. And we just migrated and evolved into what we are doing right now. So we focus on certifying. We cover the whole gamut of testing requirements for the industry, anywhere from certifying the products to be able to enter the market, to barely satisfy the local jurisdictions and some of the developers and financial institutions, to doing the extensive reliability and durability tests that have become really prevalent and known and required in the market right now. And I think we're going to be touching on one of those topics right now, is really to try to go beyond what is required as a basic element to enter, to feel the product into the market and into the industry, and going beyond that to try to understand how will the product fare in a decade or two, and in some cases much sooner. So that's the history of RETC. We are a CBTL company. Just maybe to go into a bit more details, we're a CBTL, which is a certification body test laboratory. It's the highest accreditation a laboratory in our scope can get to. It's incredibly difficult to attain that status, and we've had it since day one, since 2009, actually 2010. We incorporated in 2009, and we gained our status about 6 months later. We focus, like I said, partly on certification, and we cover all the standards that apply to the PV industry for the entire balance of system, including the PV modules, trackers, and racks. And then we do a lot of our contributions revolve around bankability testing, which is, like I said, going beyond the standards, beyond the minimum requirements. Personally, I have a semiconductor background. I started out in semiconductors, spent about 12 years doing really high-tech product engineering, failure analysis, and test engineering. And then in 2007, I caught the solar bug, like many of us have, throughout the years. And I joined a company probably very well known now, Solaria Corporation, where that's where my path with Dan Sugar intersected way back when. And then after that, a few years after Solaria, after the market and they started to mature, and we've gone through some instability, around 2008, 2009. We decided to found RETC, and that's how the whole venture came to fruition back in 2009.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I guess from now, it would be good for Marty to hear, as I mentioned, yeah, what happened? What made NexTracker sort of start to think about tackling this topic and creating the NX Navigator?
Okay, so first, just quick introduction, I guess. So I'm Marty Rogers. I'm VP of Asset Management and Support at NexTracker globally. I handle a couple different groups here: the training group, the commissioning groups, the data analytics teams, the warranty support, the technical support teams as well. We've got divisions obviously all over the world. I've got teams set up in Brazil, Australia, India, the US, and then field team members dispersed throughout the world as well, including parts of Europe now, and as we continue to grow, moving into Africa and the Middle East. I've been with NexTracker about 4 years. I've been in solar 10 years, and prior to that, I was in Schneider Electric for 15 years. I've been in the electrical market for about 35 years, so sorry, that's why the hair is gray. It's still there, so that's good. I'll keep the still there part. I've got about 60 team members on my team around the world. And we work both obviously directly with the customers, but internally, so that we have kind of a full circle of not only quality and what's going on with the product and how the product's operating in the field, and we do our data analytics off of that, but also with the product development, the new things, what's the customer seeing, what trouble areas are coming up, what's kind of new in the industry, and working with the product management team and the engineering team to help figure out one, is the customer really finding a problem that needs to be solved? That's key. And two, how do we use some of the tools and unique parts of NexTracker in order to solve that? So most of you know NexTracker is the biggest single axis tracker company in the world. We have well over 20 gigs sold at this point. We are connected directly to about 60% of our installed base, which is quite interesting. And by connected, I mean a direct connection through our NERC center. That gives us a lot of data, right? Like aggregate data of what's happening at different plants and how they're operating and how they're working. And it's super key as far as how do you develop the next thing. So a couple of years ago, we came out with something called TrueCapture, and TrueCapture was a system that allowed you to do, mitigate your rotor shading and give you diffused light production that was increased. And when we did that, we introduced additional communication tools onto the site, things like a data monitoring unit that actually is not just monitoring the data off the site, but actually collecting the data off the site and giving us this historical references off of it. And when we did that the first time, we had a customer who came to us and said, hey, wouldn't it be great if you could be supplemental to my SCADA system and actually show me how my tracker is doing and what angles it's at and all these things. So we said, yeah, that sounds great. And we looked around at other customers who had the same need and felt like we could come up with something based on our independent architecture that not only takes the ideas of what we've done with TrueCapture, which is focused on the fact that each tracker is independent and operates independently, but also looking at the control systems and the communication systems and seeing what other things we could add to that that would be an enhancement for the customer. So we started to come to the conclusion that we had a lot of data, and with the Navigator product that we're talking about in line here with the risk mitigation, using that data and using remote switching capability and on-site switching capability, There were a lot of different things that we could go add to the field after it had been installed. So it wasn't like we had to redo the tracker, right? We don't have to sell a new tracker in order to promote these systems and move these systems forward. These are things that we've looked at our architecture and said, how do we use the architecture that we have in the communication system and the independent tracking rows and actually get additional benefit besides the yield? And now looking at how do we protect the system, right? So I think when we started looking at Navigator, it was kind of, okay, we can tell the angle the tracker's at, we can look at it as a maintenance tool, and then we started developing ideas around these issues that we're seeing on risk. And the hail risk, we know of a project that had a $70 million insurance claim on it because of the damage from hail. It wasn't one of the NexTracker projects, but nonetheless, it was in the hail area. And that really jumped out at Dan, our CEO, and said, oh my God, here's an opportunity for us to work with our customers and really develop an additional benefit to the NexTracker and the use of the NexTracker system. So we've been working on it for probably about 6 months. We've rolled it out to a number of beta customers, and now we're rolling it out to the general population. It does a couple things, but hail stow is one of the key issues that we're going to talk about here. And we'll talk at the end maybe about some of the other things that we can do with Navigator.
Yeah, for sure. Yes, absolutely. Especially, I think, NexTracker has a very vast global track. But for the US, I think specifically, extreme weather has been one of the main challenges facing a lot of solar asset owners, wildfires and hailstorms. Yes, indeed, the project in Texas, it was sort of surprising when I was reading the headlines as well. It's, I guess, also for the insurance industry, is something you kind of need that backup to make sure, to show the money to increase the reliability and all of these things. And I guess just focusing on the US, which parts of the US are more prone and subject to the negative impact of these extreme hail events?
So I think, there's certainly super clear areas, right? Like, going through Texas and Utah and Colorado, but also on the East Coast. And I mean, mostly on the Southeast of the US. I live in Tennessee. I work out of Tennessee. Our corporation is actually based in California, but I work here with my team. But we get hailstorms in Tennessee, you get hailstorms in Virginia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia. And I think the other interesting thing is over time, we've seen the size and the weight of the hail actually increase. So these are things that are changing in our environment today, and we have to think about those as we go forward. I also think that when we talk about the insurance industry, and I want to give them a bit of a shout out, because they are actually the people who drive a lot of improvements both in safety and in consistency of product design and stuff like that. So them looking at things like the cost of hail damage and applying that on solar plants, and then understanding that there's tools to mitigate that damage or mitigate that risk, they're big drivers for this. And the cost of this insurance is it's not cheap, right? It has a high impact on the overall operating cost of a plant. So by doing something like this, you can actually not just help the industry, but reduce the operation plant cost and ensure a much better and more sound system over time. So I think when we look across the world, there are other places in the world that also have hail, but definitely in the US, we have some massive storms. I will say that we typically get a warning, right? Like in Tennessee, they'll tell us in the morning news, oh, you're going to have hail. It's going to be around 3 o'clock. And so there is a warning, right? It's not like this is some mystery that just pops up. Like, as most of you know, we just had a tornado here too, which was more of a mystery. But with hail, we actually have some good pre-warning, and then you can operate your system in the most effective way to protect it from getting damaged.
Yeah, yes, indeed. I think choice of technology perhaps is very crucial in demonstrating to the insurance why certain projects can withstand extreme events such as hailstorms. It's interesting you mentioned East Coast. We obviously, with Solar Management North America, perhaps a big emphasis we have is on the West Coast, given where the conference takes place. But now this being a virtual platform, it's a kind of a different world out there when it comes to the operations maintenance. I feel like the US is West Coast versus East Coast is completely different when it comes to the weather challenges. which is also
Yeah, I think if you look at the U.S. and you think of it as one market, you're absolutely wrong, right? And if you think of
absolutely,
your
yeah.
designs as one market, you're absolutely wrong. If you think about how you do your installations as one market, it's wrong. And we do the same all over the world, right? Every market has its own, kind of micro levels of issues that go on. And when we look at, for instance, on the East Coast in the southern U.S., we have a lot of hurricanes. So we have a hurricane stow function as well. When we look at that kind of Texas throughout that broader, kind of Midwest area, we look at things like hail, and we have different strategies for that. So I think it's really understanding the micro part of where your systems are installed, and not just thinking of them at this broad-based level of, okay, everything in the US is the exact same. It's not true. You're right.
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. I do understand, just to have a better idea of how a NX Navigator works. Cherif, you have done some testing on this product, and I wanted to actually talk about that as well, because it's always good, in the solar space, we do love quite a bit of data backing up what we're talking about. And I'm sure asset owners usually appreciate having a better feel of the numbers in terms of, how effective this is, to what extent, how it impacts the survivability of the solar PV cells when it comes to these extreme hail events. So maybe if you want to talk a bit more about the testing you have done in collaboration with NexTracker at your test center, it will be great. And at some point, we will also cue some footage of the actual real-time footage of what you have done with the test for people to have a better idea of what went down.
Absolutely. So, as Marty mentioned, I mean, it started out as an idea, right? It started out as a theory, and it's always interesting whenever you venture in these things to find out exactly what pans out. And I had an inclination, and I had a belief that we would see something positive. So it started out as us trying to figure out if the modules were to be left in the field the way they are, essentially in any position the tracker would be at the time of the hail event. And in many cases, if the hail event happens in the middle of the day, the modules would be in a position that would not be optimal, right? And so we said, okay, let's start off with that, just to understand the energy required to break a module, right? And we did that, and then it's pretty straightforward. We've done that many times for many years, and that was interesting. And we said, okay, that's the baseline. Then we said, okay, what is the theory here? The theory is that if a tracker, such as the NexTracker product, if it's able to react upon request by the site O&M team or the developer or the owner, if it's able to react very fast to a hail event and stow away the module in a direction at an angle that allows them to subject the module to the hail event at a very steep angle, what would we get, right? And so the theory is simple, the test is simple enough. What was really, really impressive to me was that I thought that we would see maybe a 20, 30, 50% increase in the module's ability to withstand hail. What I didn't expect is a 300% increase. That was pretty amazing. And so that was substantial enough for me, at least personally, to spend many days doing this test. And so and I think, maybe anecdotally, what's doesn't come into, doesn't show up in the reports and the video and all the discussions is the fact that when we saw that, when I got the results, I didn't communicate them to NexTracker. I actually had to go and redo the test several times because I just didn't believe the results myself, right? And so we went through dozens of modules, broke so many modules, got a lot of data, and I'm a believer, and it's true. So essentially, the energy required to break a module when the module is normal to the projectile, to the ice ball, is and it's calculated and it's reported in the reports. And so when you stow the module as an NexTracker, it turns out that it takes about 3 times the energy to break the same module, and that's pretty big. That's pretty amazing. what that translates to in real life is it could essentially save modules from breaking in the field, and in about 95% of all the hail events that could happen in the Midwest region, and that's pretty substantial, right? Assuming that the operators react to this, pretty early and put the trackers in a hail stow position.
Yes, it's interesting that you see that you also didn't believe it was too good to be true in the beginning. When I was actually also looking at some of the numbers, I thought perhaps maybe there was a typo. 300%, that is very substantial indeed. But yeah, I do understand sort of your hesitance as well in this. I was also curious about the types of tests you've conducted, because as we've talked about before as well, it's particularly challenging for solar PV to be able to quantify the negative impact on energy level, but you sort of had a way of identifying the most plausible testing to be able to have a good feel for what's happening. So maybe if you could talk about also the types of tests and what you've done and the why behind it, would be interesting for people to just have an idea as the background information.
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, we started out our venture as a certification company early on, and so we've done hundreds of certification projects. And one thing that all certifications require for module manufacturers is to undergo a hail test. The hail test required by certification is literally it's a 1-inch ice ball that projectile that is projected that's shot at a module at 23 meters per second. It's for all intents and purposes a non-event test. I've never seen anything fail from that test. I think it's really it's a checkbox in the certification scheme. So it really doesn't bring any value to the industry for a module manufacturer to go and say, I passed the hail test under the IEC 61215 certification requirements. And so what is really important to note is over the last few years, there have been an increasing, and that's, an increasing number of warranty claims around the hail events in the Midwest and in the US. And that is, as Marty mentioned, there's one particular claim that's $70 million, and there are multiple like that. I've been part of multiple warranty claims related to hail over the past few years. And the reason this is happening is because most manufacturers are not really looking at what are realistic hail events out there in the field relative to what the certification requirements are. And that's basically our core business, right? We look at the certification, we look at the real application and try to bridge the gap, and not and allow manufacturers, allow financial institutions and developers to look at what should be done in a lab setting to understand how these products are going to behave in the field. And this is exactly what NexTracker did in this case. It's to try to understand how to account for hail events that are happening in the field and prevent them from damaging modules. And in this case, what we ended up doing is looking in terms of, and you can look at the report, but in terms of the hail, the ice ball, there is some studies. There've been a lot of research. There's been a lot of research and a lot of studies out there that describe the average hail ice ball coming from in different areas, and the frequency, etc. And that's what we took into account, and we found that a 2-inch ice ball at the speed at which we used is very representative of the hail events that are happening in the Midwest. And beyond that, I think what we did in this case, we went actually beyond. We didn't just stop at what is really representative of the US. We just figured, okay, what will it take to actually cause a fracture in the glass and completely destroy a module? And that's where we set as the baseline. So, we've really broken a lot of barriers in terms of trying to understand how to mitigate this risk from an application standpoint. But in general, what we do is we tend to use the 2-inch hail test as a screening process to understand whether modules are going to be able to survive hail events in the field. And we've done that. We continue doing that. We're actually engaging right now on multiple projects where the insurance companies are levying huge premiums on products that have not undergone this type of testing, to assure them that they would not, they would not be losing a lot of products in the field when hail events happen.
Yeah. Indeed, it's very important to just have a good realistic view of better testing. I think, especially when it comes also again to just ensuring the next era of these solar assets in the US, I think perhaps a bit more nuance is needed in a lot of these conversations when we talk about certain testings. That's what's really, truly is going to help with the reliability of the project in the long term. I think we have a bit of work to do on that front. So it's something definitely worth just molding over for everybody. But in terms of you doing the testing and, maybe you can talk about some of the recommendations and conclusions you came out with, because I do understand that set up also what the NX Navigator in general functions. Sort of if you could talk about some of those outcomes, some of those conclusions, and then we can move on to Marty. So he can maybe talk about the NX Navigator features a bit more coming out of all of these conclusions and recommendations.
We can. Hold on one second, though. I want to bring this home a little bit to people, because if you've lived in the South or in Texas and you've gone through a hailstorm, I think to bring home what Cherif is saying is you should go look at your car hood after you have a hailstorm. Okay? It's like this dimpled machine has run across your car. And if you're thinking about the insurance industry, and you replace a hood, maybe it's not a big deal. But when you think about the insurance industry, think about the roofs that get damaged during a hailstorm. These events are huge, guys. I mean, this is not something that, a piece of hail fell on my car. Gee, that's a shame. This is, a piece of hail killed my car and put 25 dimples in my hood and ruined my roof. So I just want to make sure people really understand the impact that we're talking about with Cherif here on what it really does.
Yeah, absolutely. Fair point. Yes. Yeah. Maybe you can then also, Cherif, talk about, some of the outcomes on a more sort of number side of things, the anecdotal outcomes and conclusions you came up from the testing, speaking also sort of to Marty's remarks.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, what we did in this particular phase is we looked at catastrophic failures of modules. And this is similar to what we see, for instance, in warranty claims, where you have a big hail event. Everybody has heard of, some of the horror stories in Texas and a few other areas where you go through a power plant after a hailstorm and you see literally holes in modules. And so this is basically what we looked at in this particular phase, is when insurance companies get a phone call from a power plant owner saying, hey, I have thousands of modules with holes in them that need to be replaced. That's what we looked at, right? And from that perspective, like I said, I mean, if you can, in this particular case, and by the way, I misspoke earlier, I said 95%, this stow feature could prevent 95%, of the hail events in the US. It's actually 99.4%, just to be clear. I mean, it's pretty substantial. But what we looked at is really catastrophic damage to the modules. And it's real. It's, this is stuff that happens. We get modules back from the field with literally holes in them. I mean, again, just to reiterate what Marty was saying, this is not, a small scratch and nick or module underperforming. And so yes, these are real events. They are really catastrophic, and they do completely destroy power plants. And in this case, what we found in this particular test is if modules are just left facing the hailstorm, facing the projectiles, they're not going to fare well. If the modules are put in a stow feature in this particular case, at a 60-degree angle stow, they will be able to deflect most of the hail, most of the projectiles without severely damaging the modules. What we are working on, and maybe this is a segue to, towards what's next, what we're working on is understanding how much performance would it save a power plant on the modules that have not broken, because in many cases, and what I deal with, most of the work that I do with insurance companies and developers is not on modules that have completely shattered. Those are easy. It's anybody can go through the power plant, they pick them out, they replace them, and they move on. The lurking monster is really the modules that have not shattered, but and visually they look perfectly fine. However, from the hail impact, the cells are completely shattered internally. And that creates a severe underperformance to power plants. So there are two components to this. There are two huge benefits to this. One is saving the modules from complete and utter destruction, and two, saving modules from severe underperformance and long-term reliability issues. And these are very, very hard to assess. The impact of this is many-fold. So not only do you have to replace the modules that are shattered, but you have to deploy teams to the field. These developers or power plant owners are going to have to contract an army of people to go and perform infrared imaging, to perform flash, IV testing, understanding the performance of the strings, the modules, try to figure out and piece together what is really going on with the power plant after they've been able to identify the shattered modules. And that's phase 2 of this project. That's what we're working on, to try to assess the actual performance impact of this stow feature on the modules that have not shattered in a power plant.
Yeah, interesting. It's good to have an idea also what's coming next. Yeah, I'm sorry,
just want
Martin.
to add one more thing to that. If you build a power plant in January of this year and you have an event, a hail event in June of this year, and you lose 1,000 modules, it's fairly easy to get those 1,000 modules back, right? Like you can buy those 1,000 modules. But when you're 5 years into a plant or 4 years into a plant, with the way the development on the module has gone over time, you're actually not going to get the same module. So you have all kinds of implications on these plants if they start having this reduced production due to a hail event, of replacing the modules over time, that they're just not available. Maybe the way that the dimensions have been set up is different. Maybe the power output is different, so your strings have to change. So it's really critical that, once you've installed these systems, that you protect these systems. And I mean, that is the life of asset management, right? Is protection and ensuring the production and the output. But I just know of a couple of sites that I've worked on in past parts of my life in solar, where they had a fire or they had other problems and they needed to replace modules and they just weren't available. So yeah, they had 100 on site, but they lost 1,000. So the math isn't working that way, right? So I think the idea here is we're not just protecting it for today, we're protecting it for the life of the system in order to ensure that you don't run into those kind of problems. It's just a bigger issue. It gets a much more tougher event to go make that replacement. Aside from the thousands of hours spent to understand the damage to the module, you now have thousands of hours of downtime while you try to source the module and change the support system and maybe upgrade your combiner boxes and, reinstall these systems. So a lot to think about on it from a cost point of view.
Yeah. Actually tying it to the asset managers, and as you said, this is really very much part of the function, part of the job and the role. Sort of what are some of the features of the NX Navigator for the asset managers to be able to navigate all of these risks that we talk about? I think it would be good to just go over some of those features for people to.
Yeah, so I want to add a couple things to it. One is the Navigator is a system that connects to a connected plant, right? So having a connected plant, and with our True Capture plants, they get the Navigator. With other plants, we're working on the program for those. But with this connected plant, you have certain security concerns, right? So first off, you need to make sure that your connected plant is going through a NERC CIP certified center. In other words, the data being moved across is being secured. The gateways are all secure. The access points are secured. So secondly, for us, on the Navigator tool itself, we are giving a license to somebody to use the Navigator with the understanding that they're putting the right person in charge of the functionality of the Navigator. So as you step into the Navigator and go through the different screens, it actually asks, are you authorized? Are you authorized? Are you authorized? Because we don't want people taking the wrong action at the wrong time, right? We don't want them doing one stow function when it should be another stow function. So there is a training that goes with it. It's not dramatic, guys. I mean, it's quite simple. It's more of an idea of the lead asset management team on the plant understands that they are responsible for making these, flipping these switches basically, right? And not letting it just be done by, you know, anybody in the field, but making sure they have a certified guy or person that's available to do that. So in the Navigator function, and Navigator is, let's call it in its infancy right now. So in the infancy of Navigator, you have things like hail stow and snow stow, or snow shed, not stow. You have hurricane stow. You have other functions really focused around the risk, right, of what's going on in the plant. The second part of Navigator, as it moves forward and comes to the market, is more around the mapping of the system and a heat map of, you know, are your trackers performing correctly in the right area? Are they at the right angle? Are they doing true capture when they're supposed to do true capture? Are they going to diffuse when they're supposed to go to diffuse? That's a next phase that we come out with on Navigator. So the bundle of things that we can do, you know, kind of grows every day when we talk to customers and they say, oh, it'd be great if I could, you know, maybe when I know a rainstorm is coming, I put it at a different angle and I want a cleaning stow, right? So that's huge, right? Like if you think about people in water deprived areas, and most of our solar plants are not necessarily sitting next to city fire hydrants, you know, there's water issues and getting cleaning going and things like that. So all of those things start to add up to the asset management side, right? So first step is help them manage their risk, right? And by helping them manage the risk, you help them manage the cost of that risk vis-a-vis their insurance. The second part is help them manage the production and the production improvements of their plant by understanding exactly what's going on with their plant and where. When we were talking about plants that were, you know, 5 megawatt, to go figure out when something wasn't working was, you know, a little bit of a walk. We're talking about plants now that are 400 megawatt to 700 megawatt. These are acres and acres and acres of plant. So from an asset management point of view, understanding that each one of our devices is actually communicating with a tracker, and you can geolocate where that tracker is if there's a question or problem of how the functionality of that tracker is working. That's going to be another huge gain on the system. So we have, through our analytics team, we're also incorporating things like predictive analytics. So how do we look at the tracker functionality and predict how it's going to operate in the next 30 days, 60 days, or 90 days? That's more about how do I reduce my cost of rolling a truck. So if I see a tracker that is not tracking because the lawn, or not the lawn, but the vegetation around it grew up, right? Or it's not producing as much. Through the predictive analytics, we can help find those things. And as we connect our predictive analytics further and further down the chain in the plant, to the combiner boxes, we're running some tests, to the inverters, we're running some tests, where you get all that data and start looking at, you know, individual row capability and how it's performing and what angle is the optimum angle for that row at this particular time of the day, you know, continues to improve our capability to help the customer produce better, have, you know, longer and stronger uptimes, and really get their money in generation and reduce their cost. Getting these things like predictive analytics in the market is also huge. And these data acquisition things that we're doing right now through things like Navigator are just, they're going to be they're going to bring the market to the next level.
Well, that's a good note, I would say, to end the conversation on. Thanks a lot to our speakers for joining this conversation and sharing the expertise with us. To the listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. This is certainly an important conversation we should be having, so your participation is greatly appreciated. If you have any questions regarding anything that was discussed today in this recording, feel free to either share them with us on the virtual platform itself, or reach out to any of the NexTracker team members directly, book a meeting with them. If you have any questions for me or Cherif, our contact information will also be visible on the screen. Reach out to us and we would be happy to help you in any way we can. For now, I would like to wish you a fruitful virtual learning and networking experience for the remaining of the day or evening, depending on wherever in the world you are. And tomorrow, good luck. Thank you so much.